Dear colleagues, my name is Christoph Königs from Frankfurt University. A very warm welcome from myself and my co-speaker and colleague Jan Astermark from Malmö, Lund University, to the third module of the EHEAD webinars. Our topic today is the Factor VIII inhibitors during non-replacement therapy. I would quickly start with our disclosures. And then let's jump straight into the table of contents. We will start with what do we know already, what's relevant for our topic. Then we will continue with consideration in previously untreated patients, followed by considerations in previously treated patients and a summary of the module 3. So what do we know? First of all, in Factor VIII replacement therapy, we know that inhibitor development occurs in about 1/3 of patients with severe hemophilia A and about 10 to 15% of patients with non-severe hemophilia A. Inhibitor development mainly occurs in the beginning of the treatment in the first 20 to 50 exposure days, and several risk factors, including peak treatment moments, have been described. Factor VIII inhibitors can be eradicated with the so-called immune tolerance induction therapy, and we know that tolerance can be maintained in most of the patients. What about emicizumab prophylaxis? It's well known now that it's highly effective in prophylaxis in inhibitor as well as in non-inhibitor patients. Factor VIII or Factor VIIa are still needed for the treatment of patients under EMI prophylaxis for the treatment of bleeds and during surgery. Factor VIII inhibitor development under EMI prophylaxis and intermittent Factor VIII exposure for bleed treatment, for example, is unknown. And we also have no idea about the maintenance of tolerance after ITI and emicizumab prophylaxis without further Factor VIII exposure. Let's go a bit back and look at patients with hemophilia A receiving Factor VIII therapy, which are represented by this gray circle. A part of those patients develops antibodies against Factor VIII. This could be inhibitory as well as non-inhibitory, and those with inhibitory antibodies that are persistent are shown or are indicated in this orange circle. So these include high titer as well as low titer inhibitors, and the red circle you can see is the patients with the high titer inhibitors, and again a subset of those has high titer inhibitors that are resistant and that we cannot eradicate. So this is sort of the groups of patients we are talking about. There are several risk factors for inhibitor development and Factor VIII replacement therapy has been described. Positive influence in green and the not so positive influence in orange or red. We know that a negative family history for inhibitors as well as non-severe hemophilia A are rather protective for inhibitor development, whereas the positive hemophilia history or severe hemophilia A more easily leads to inhibitor development. Then there is the issues on ethics, on the kind of mutation, on various mutations in immunomodulatory genes. And we also have, besides those already mentioned genetic risk factors, environmental risk factors. And these include the type of treatment, potentially the type of concentrate, and further on. For the purpose of this presentation, I would only like to stress the inhibitor development according to treatment schedule. As we know from the PetNet group, for example, as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, prophylaxis seems to be protective against inhibitor development. Prophylaxis is shown here in the line, whereas the on-demand treatment and inhibitor development is shown in the dashed line. On the other side of this slide, you can see, it's shown that peak treatment moments at the beginning of Factor VIII therapy also have an increased risk for inhibitor development. Just keep that in mind when we continue the considerations in PUBs later on. We also can look at patients with mild and moderate hemophilia A. They have a lower risk for inhibitor development compared to patients with severe hemophilia A, but we know it's a lifetime risk. This is data from the INSIGHT cohort, and also in this cohort, genetic and treatment-related risk factors have been described, and these also include treatment moments. When we look at patients under non-replacement therapy, in the very beginning, we try to look at patients with non-severe hemophilia A to get an idea of how many bleeds do we expect during non-replacement therapy, and therefore, how many Factor VIII exposures do we expect. And this is also data from the INSIGHT study. In the graph, you can see the age at first Factor VIII exposure of those patients. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you see this small table indicating at what age you reach what exposure days. For example, the mean age at first exposure day in this cohort was 4 years, whereas the mean age for exposure day 20 was 10 years in this cohort. We don't really need this comparison anymore, except for sort of time frame when we expect those bleeds, because we now have bleeding data from the FVIII trials with emicizumab, but also from real-world evidence. And what you can see here, that in general, for all 4 FVIII studies, on the left-hand side, you can see the summary. The expected annualized bleed rate is very low. I need to stress for the purpose of this presentation as well that the study in PUPS is still ongoing. So can we use data from mild and moderate hemophilia A to transfer this knowledge we have to patients with severe hemophilia A and emicizumab treatment? Well, for bleeding rates, I suppose there is some comparison possible, but now we also have bleeding data available from clinical trials and real-world evidence. What about the immunological situation regarding inhibitor development? I think it's highly unlikely that we can have any useful comparison here, because the causative Factor VIII gene mutation is very different in non-severe compared to severe hemophilia A. What about the treatment situation? We have no idea, but there may be a role of prophylaxis of peak treatment moments and Factor VIII exposure under replacement versus non-replacement therapy. So with that, I would like to conclude the first part of module 3 with a little quiz. Which answer is not correct? About 1/3 of patients with severe hemophilia A develop inhibitors against Factor VIII. Number 2, prophylaxis is protective against inhibitor development. Number 3, patients with non-severe hemophilia A are expected to reach 20 Factor VIII exposure days by the age of 3 years. And number 4, patients with emicizumab monoprophylaxis experience a low rate of treatment bleeds. So the question was, which answer is not correct? And I would like to discuss this together with my colleague, Jan.
Thank you, Chris. So let's take them one by one. So if you start with the first one, about 1/3 of patients with hemophilia A develop inhibitors against Factor VIII. Yes, I think even though the figures range in the literature due probably to the small cohorts, I think it's reasonable to say that yes, 1/3 of patients are expected to develop inhibitors against Factor VIII. The second one, prophylaxis is protective against inhibitor development. Well, I think you showed the slide and the data from the PEDNET group, and I think it's reasonable to believe and think that as prophylaxis being protective with a regular and continuous exposure to the antigen, and that this could be a good thing. Regarding the non-severe hemophilia A and expected to reach 20 exposures by the age of 3 years, I think here also you showed nicely in your slide from the INSIGHT study that based on the bleed frequency that is expected, it will take much longer for the majority of patients to reach 20 exposure. And I think you showed a mean age around 10 years. And finally, patients with ME monoprophylaxis, what about the bleed rate? And I think from the FVIII trial and also real world evidence we have today, yes, we expect to have quite low rate of treated bleeds in these patients. So I think, yes, all of them are correct, but number 3 is not correct.
Yes, thank you very much, Jan. And with this, we would like to conclude the first part of module 3 of the EHEAD webinar series. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for part 2.